Life is rough, but I'm so fortunate to have met you. My orphaned account on AO3. Episode 7, Chapter 5, The Aftermath. From the beginning, Izuku had known his neighbors were pro-heroes, even if they had never said anything. Mr. Sashi was obviously Present Mike. What with his blonde hair and glasses, and the plethora of put-your-hands-up radio memorabilia that seemed to consume his apartment. And Mr. Shouta was obviously a hero too. Even if Izuku wasn't exactly sure who he was, most likely someone underground, because of the way he carried himself. Back to the wall, eyes cast down every entry and exit in the room, standing loose-limbed in case he needed to move quickly. It was how Izuku moved, albeit very, very different reasons. But heroes or not, Izuku didn't tell them. He didn't tell them he was quirkless. Freak of nature, weak, geneless, not normal. Because he was not afraid. Not of them, but of them leaving. His mother had died because he was quirkless. Kachan bullied him because he was quirkless. His father left him because he was quirkless, only coming around long enough to pay rent and throw Izuku around a bit every month. Izuku hadn't been sure if he should be happy or concerned that it had been months since his father last appeared. Izuku knew, of course, that Mr. Shouta and Mr. Sashi were different. They were kind, feeding him, dressing his wounds, and they were protective, taking care of him when he was sick, and they cared about him. They did. He just didn't want them to stop. But now, because Izuku remained silent about his quirklessness, because he was a no-good, useless Deku, Mr. Shouta was hurt. He was hurt because Izuku couldn't do anything. Izuku had watched an interview with All Might a few years ago. All Might, the #1 hero in Japan, had said something Izuku had never forgotten. "What makes a hero?" the interview had asked. All Might had chuckled his deep laugh, the noise echoing in Izuku's head, and making his light up. "All great heroes," All Might had diverged, "shared an experience much the same. In a time of great peril, their bodies seemed to move of their own accord. Their feet carried them into danger, and their arms and hands protected those who needed protecting. Their bodies just knew. They were born to be heroes." Izuku had always thought he was born to be a hero. He protected other kids, younger, smaller kids, on the other playground when Kachan got too rough. He had protected his mom, way back when he was small. But he hadn't protected Mr. Shouta. Mr. Shouta had gotten hurt. Was probably dying. Because Izuku was helpless to stop the bad guys. The villains. He was useless, geneless, quirkless Deku. And he always would be. Which is why, while the police cruiser was driving them back to the apartment, Izuku hatched a plan. Mr. Sashi would chase after him, not knowing about his quirklessness, and not knowing to stay away, so Izuku would have to distract the man, or wait for him to take his hearing aids out and fall asleep, which, seeing the way Sashi's body was slumped with exhaustion, wouldn't take long. But where would Izuku go? He couldn't go home. Not only could Mr. Sashi find him easily right next door, but even if he was able to find Izuku, where the Botter's boy came home, if he'd heard about what Izuku had done, Izuku would be in for a royal black and blue beating. But Izuku had to run. He had to get away. After all, he couldn't hurt Mr. Sashi or Mr. Shouta if the man ever be alive to be hurt if he was there. He couldn't hurt anyone if he didn't exist. It was time like these that Izuku couldn't help but wish he had never been born. Mr. Sashi, even through his blanketed expression, lifted Izuku up into his arms, cradled him into his chest like Izuku was 9 months old and not 9 years old, and oh, yeah, it was his birthday today, wasn't it? And taking Mr. Teddy's leash in hand, that wasn't rubbing circles into Izuku's spine. The touch was comforting. And dang it, why was Izuku crying? He was a big crybaby. Kachan was right. Big, useless, weakling crybaby. Mr. Sashi was murmuring soothing words to Izuku as he struggled to open the apartment door, kicking it shut behind him, taking Mr. Teddy over to lay down on his bed. Mr. Sashi ruffled the dog's ears and praised him. Good boy. You did so good today, Teddy. Before turning to dodge Sport and Bastard, who weaved between his legs as he went into the guest bathroom. Hey, sweetheart, Mr. Sashi murmured a little louder, causing his murmurs and pulling Izuku's face into his line of sight. I need to go get changed. Do you think you could take a quick shower for me, kiddo? I'll pull out some clean clothes for you. Mutely, Izuku nodded. Mrs. Sashi hesitated, looking conflicted, before he nodded and crouched to start the shower for Izuku. I'll only be a few minutes, okay, kiddo? And then I'll be right back. I just need to get out of this shirt, okay? Oh yeah, because Mr. Sashi's shirt was soaked red with Shota's blood. Because you're a useless Deku. Kachan's voice screamed in his head. Because you're just in the way and stealing everything from me. His father's voice echoed. Izuku nodded again, too afraid he started crying once he spoke. Biting his lip, still looking concerned, Mr. Sashi sighed and ran a hand through Izuku's matted, sweated locks. It'll just be a minute, sweetheart, he murmured, more to himself than Izuku. Just a minute. Izuku waited until Mr. Sashi left, waited until he heard the lock of the man's bedroom door shutting, waited until fog started building onto the mirror and dampening his skin, before he left the bathroom. Creeping as silently as he could, Izuku tiptoed past the bathroom, past the guest's bathroom, past the mentor bed. Crying. Izuku heard crying. With a start, taking a moment longer than he should have, Izuku realized he heard Mr. Sashi crying. It was muffled, wretched sobs that would have been louder had they not been stifled. Izuku knew that Mr. Sashi must have been trying to keep himself quiet because of him. Mr. Sashi was trying to keep quiet because of Izuku. Izuku didn't deserve Mr. Sashi's kindness. He didn't deserve Mr. Sashi trying to stay strong for him. Flashes of large hands swatting him into his bedroom wall, lifting up behind Izuku's eyes, and he smacked a hand over his mouth to stifle his gasp. Mr. Sashi would never hurt Izuku. Not like his father would. Not in a million, bazillion, zillion years. Izuku knew it. So why was he getting so scared? Silently, Izuku continued his tiptoeing down the hall. He got to the front door, only interrupted once by Bastard, who was probably curious as to why his father wasn't home. Izuku silently apologized to the cat, patting Bastard's head as he sniffled. He'd missed the cats. He'd missed the morning breakfasts and the time spent around the table. He'd missed movie nights and morning walks and evening dinners and time spent with the two greatest fathers he could have ever wanted. He'd missed Teddy. He'd missed his dad's. But he had to go. He had to leave. To get out of the apartment before he did any more harm to the people he's grown to love so fiercely. Right when he got to the door, hand halfway outstretched to the knob, he felt a cold and wet nose nudge his cheek. Turning sharply, the child gasped out a whisper, "Mr. Teddy!" The dog, who had limped over from his bed, was now sitting right next to Izuku, his big black eyes seemingly pleading with the boy. Mr. Teddy whimpered, licking Izuku's cheek twice, before he whimpered again, laying down at Izuku's feet, and lowering his head, nibbling on the boy's shoe in a begging manner. And suddenly, Izuku couldn't contain himself. In earnest, Izuku began to sob. Hisashi couldn't breathe. The entire ride home, he'd been unable to take in a proper breath. And then, when he got Izuku home, and he had set the child down, he nearly vomited when he realized he was coated in his husband's blood. As gently as he could, Hisashi asked, begged, Izuku to take a shower. He needed to change. He needed to get out of the shirt. He needed to breathe. Izuku, because he was an awesome, wonderful, thoughtful, and caring and amazing child, nodded, and let Hisashi escape for a moment. Because Hisashi couldn't breathe, and he was coated in his husband's blood, and he needed to stay strong for Izuku, but he couldn't breathe. Hisashi ripped his shirt off over his head, knocking over one of his hearing aids askew. Quickly, wetting a wet rag under his bathroom sink, his and Shota's, Shota, Shota. Hisashi rubbed down the skin of his chest, wiping away the blood that colored in the black word lines of his tattoo like a grotesque painting. Hisashi immediately threw the rag in the garbage to be disposed of later, because right now, Izuku needed him. Quickly readjusting into a clean shirt, ignoring the way it clung to his damp skin, Hisashi turned and saw Shota's pajamas laying on the floor, discarded in a haste to get ready for the day, and Shota's slippers by the bed, knocked over as the man had hardly kicked them off, and Shota's book on the bedside table, a nerdy novel he'd been excited for, although he'd never show it. And suddenly, Hisashi was bubbling up like a boiling pot. He still couldn't breathe. A wretched sob ripped its way from his lungs, and Hisashi quickly threw himself over the bed, burying his face in a pillow to muffle the sound. His shoulders racked with sobs. Hisashi attempted to console himself by rocking slowly, trying to ignore the weight of the world on his shoulder because he couldn't lose his Shota. And then the hearing aid that hadn't been knocked askew picked up the sound of crying. Not Hisashi's crying. It was the soft, whimpering cry of a child who had known too much of the darkest part of the world around them, a child who had known abuse and abandonment and hatred for so long. And Hisashi felt immensely guilty. Immediately in his brain, Shota's voice snapped at him. Don't be illogical, Sashi. It's normal for you to be feeling these emotions. Just don't forget that he's feeling them too. And the both of you will be alright. The Shota in Hisashi's mind sounded far too much like he was saying goodbye. So Hisashi ignored him in favor of stealing his shoulders and quietly, slowly making his way into the hall. In a few short strides, Hisashi was at the hem of his apartment, and his heart cracked, because Izuku was sitting there, curled into a ball once more, snuggling his face into Teddy's fur in an attempt to stifle his cries. Oh, Izu, Hisashi murmured, gently brushing Teddy over the side. At the dog indication, and reached down to lift Izuku into his arms. It's okay, sweetheart. You can cry, Sprout. Whether it was the use of Shota's nickname for him, or Hisashi's quiet consolation, Hisashi didn't know, but Izuku suddenly began to wail. It was wretched wails, the kind that a man faced by death of his family, or a child by the death of a father, would make. Izuku's shoulders were lurching. His little lungs gasped for air as he wailed and wailed and wailed. Tears and snot were getting all over Hisashi's clean shirt, but the man couldn't bring himself to care. All he could care about right now was Izuku, his kid, his son. There, Izu. There, sweetheart, you're okay. You're gonna be fine. And then, Izuku gasped out, Papa! And no, Hisashi startled, something pining around his heart. That was what that felt like. Papa! 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 Izuku wailed out, rubbing at his eyes with one hand and grabbing at Atoshi's arm with the other. Papa, is Papa. Daddy, they were dads. Izuku saw them as fathers. And oh yeah, Hisashi and Shota would be enacting those late-night plans ASAP. Izuku began again, only for his lungs to begin failing him. Hisashi realized with a start that the child was having a panic attack. Okay, kiddo, it's okay. Breathe, sweetheart. Just breathe me, okay? In, 2, 3, 4, out. 2, 3, 4, in. Hisashi repeated the words, placing Izuku's hands on his chest so that the child could feel the rise and fall and try to mimic it. It took a while, although time seemed irrelevant anyways. until Izuku managed to calm down. But, though trying to soothe his kid, Hisashi managed to get his own breathing under control as well. There, kiddo, Hisashi murmured. You're alright. We're alright. We're... But Izuku's next words caught Hisashi off guard. Papa, I'm sorry. Kiddo, Izuku started, utterly bewildered. Because why was Izuku apologizing? Hisashi and Shouta were the heroes. They were the adults. They were the ones who should have been protecting Izuku. And the ones who should be apologizing. But Izuku cut Hisashi short once more, and the boy started out. It's my fault, because I'm a worthless, geneless detective. Geneless. Hearing the slur fall from his kid's lips was startling, especially when the child was referring to himself. And really, Hisashi and Shouta had thought for some time that Izuku might have been quirkless. After all, most kids his age had no quorums or hesitations in showing off their quirks whenever they could. And even Izuku, shy as he was, showed off in other ways. His hero analysis journals was one of his favorite things to share with them, and Shouta and Hisashi were always eager to share their thoughts on the boy. It was an exercising bond, one that had drawn them closer. So close, in fact, that Izuku now called Hisashi Papa. But there were other things Hisashi needed to address, namely Izuku's opinion of himself. Gently settling the boy down, Hisashi took a gentle hold on the child's face, a palm on either cheek. It said something that the boy didn't even flinch when Hisashi did so, and the man was nearly taken aback by the utter trust the child had in him. Izuku, I need you to listen to me, okay, sweetheart? Please tell me you're listening. I'm listening, Izuku hiccuped, trying in a deep breath and letting it out through his mouth. Hisashi smiled gently, as sincere as he could. You are not worthless, and you're not a nobody. You're not any of these terrible things people have told you in the past, kiddo. But I'm quirkless, and I don't care, Izuku. Hisashi spoke empathetically, pummeling past the child's defenses and making Izuku let tiny gasp. Shouta doesn't either. We love you, no matter what, and there is nothing wrong with being quirkless. Do you hear me, kiddo? I don't understand. Izuku trailed off into hiccups. Hisashi shushed him quietly, running a hand through the boy's matted green locks. I know, sweetheart, but I'll keep telling you until you believe it, okay? There is nothing wrong with you. You are not worthless or useless, and you are certainly not geneless, okay? The slur felt horrible on Hisashi's tongue, but he needed so desperately for Izuku to understand him, to know that what Hisashi said was true. Even if Izuku couldn't believe it now, he would one day. Hisashi would make sure of it. I love you so much, kiddo, Hisashi said. After a beat of quiet, the stillness only interrupted by Izuku's heavy breathing and the mewing of Baster and Spork in the background, Izuku mumbled, Promise? And no, if Hisashi's heart couldn't break any more for his boy. I promise, Izu. Do you want a hug? Izuku let loose one more bit of a sob as he nodded frantically, lunging into Hisashi's arms before the man could even tilt forward to embrace the child. Wrapping his arms around his kid, Hisashi breathed into Izuku's sweaty hair, leaving a kiss on the crown of the boy's head. Humming quietly, he rocked back and forth, until Izuku's heavy breathing stilted. Are you ready for your bath, kiddo? Mutely, Izuku nodded. All throughout the child's bath, Izuku yawned and rubbed at beery eyes. Hisashi washed the kid's hair, rinsing thoroughly and putting a leave-in conditioner in the child's curls that would leave them soft and silky. It was something Hisashi had brought for Shouta, something that man refused to use and left sitting in their guest bathroom. When Izuku began listening off to the side, Hisashi chuckled and dropped a towel over the child's head. Get dried off, kiddo. I'll go shower and grab you some clothes, okay? Okay, Papa. And there it was again. Papa. The only thing that could make this better was Shouta being there. And not being in the hospital, bleeding out from a knife wound, likely fighting for his life. Showering as quickly as he could, forgetting his usual hair routine, which he knew he would regret later, Hisashi grabbed a fresh pair of boxer shorts and a small hoodie from their dresser before running to the guest bathroom, knocking on the door, opening it at Izuku's tiny "Come in." Hisashi saw that Izuku had dressed back into his underwear and t-shirt. "Here you go, kiddo. I don't think we have much your size, but I tried." A short shrug from the man made Izuku giggle, and Hisashi mentally counted that as a win. Izuku dressed into the hoodie, a hot pink monstrosity with cats in the front that Murray had bought for Shouta as a joke. It had somehow accidentally been thrown into the dryer where it shrunk 2 sizes too small and tugged on the boxer shorts, stumbling around as he did so. "Socks?" The little boy all but begged, even though he didn't need to. Hisashi would do anything for his kid at the moment, and Hisashi retrieved the fluffiest pair of socks in the house for the boy. The crew socks went all the way up to his knees, where the boxer shorts just barely didn't cover, and the hoodie covered the child from mid-thigh down his arms, a good few inches past his fingertips. "Nap time, kiddo," Hisashi murmured at the boy, as Izuku yawned widely once more. "Mr. Teddy?" Izuku murmured, and Hisashi chuckled as he picked up the boy. He may have grunted a bit, too, but it was a good thing that Izuku was finally gaining weight with eating with them. He was still far too small for his age, but he put on some good muscle and a good amount of chub for a kid. "Sure thing, sweetheart. We'll get Teddy." As if summoned by his name, Teddy appeared in the living room as the duo entered it, giving a soft "wolf" as Hisashi gently tossed Izuku onto the couch. The child giggled a bit, but ultimately wrapped an arm around Teddy's neck as the dog jumped onto the couch and let his eyes shutter shut. "Good night, Izu. I'll wake you up in a little bit, okay?" He needed to call Tsukauchi to get an update on Shouta. If anyone could wrangle the truth out of a nurse on Hisashi's husband's condition, it would be the human lie detector. And besides, Hisashi needed to call Namuri and Tensei, and Shouta's mom and... Hisashi let out a yawn, rubbing a hand over his face, looking over at his kid, nestled up on the couch with their dog. The man couldn't help but smile. He was worried, yes, but Shouta was strong and stubborn, the most mulish man Hisashi had ever had the pleasure of falling in love with. He'll be all right. Hisashi could close his eyes for a moment. Just a single moment. And then he woke up and dragged Izuku to the hospital, where Shouta would be recovering from surgery. Everything was going to work out fine. Okay, again, I do not have much on notes because I have read this fic before. I will say, I did sob again. I have read this before and I cried at Hisashi's bit, at Izuku's bit, but specifically Hisashi's bit. It gets me every single fucking time. I love how this author, who unfortunately I can't give kudos to specifically because orphan account, but I loved how they portrayed the grief one goes to when a loved one is going through something and you have to hold it together. Because, you have to hold it together. Because you have someone that relies on you. Right? And, specifically, I haven't had to experience this, firsthand as, a parent. But, as an older sibling, when I remember my grandma was, in the hospital. It wasn't anything really big or really serious, but they couldn't figure out what's wrong with her. She had debilitating pain in her leg to the point where she could not walk. Right? It was debilitating pain. And they couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. The whole family had we had already decided that weekend was going to be a weekend where, the family came and celebrated something, together as a family. And then grandma gets sick and everyone's worried and everyone's just trying to have a good time, right? Still, the adults are still trying to have a good time because they can't let the kids know that it's it's bad, because they just can't let the grandkids know. They need to hold on. And obviously I knew what was happening, and then there was talk that she might have to go through surgery, and I remember I was scared, right? And obviously it's not big. It's not as big as when my, Echo Bro specifically had a fever so horrible that he went unresponsive. He passed out and he had to be taken to the emergency room, and we were really worried. Or when my little brother started coughing out blood at the ripening age of 2 and had a really bad fever. Or, like, it's not as bad as any of those, right? It's not as bad as any of those, right? Because it was just debilitating pain. The doctors were not worried. They were not treating her immediately. They were not worried, and the surgery was low risk. But, mind you, as someone who actually had to, like, you know, like, obviously having, you know, as I said, 2 siblings who already had to be hospitalized to the point where, like, it's worrying. Like, specifically the youngest, my youngest brother, has been hospitalized multiple times throughout his year. Every time a family member of mine is hospitalized, I worry to an extent. It could be something so small, and my anxiety is through the roof. But as someone who had to go through that, right, having the grandma be in the hospital, or for example, my little brother, right, that's a better example, right, and having when, you know, Echo Bro or my little sister ask me, like, if everything's okay, and, like, I have to hold it in for them. Like, I have to breathe, and I need to hold it in for them. Because they cannot see me cry, because if they see me crying and they see me feeling this, right, they will start to worry. And in their head, it's nothing big yet. They can't worry. And it reminds me of that. It reminds me of the time where we all got into a car crash. And it wasn't a big one. We're fine. No one was hurt. But I remember, like, the kids were really scared. And I had to hold myself in. Like, I was scared. Right? But I pushed it aside. I hold myself in because I can't cry. I could not panic. I had to think logically for them. And it's I love how this author portrayed that, right? A lot of the times it's like you have to sit down and you have to, as the adult, have to remember that if it's this bad for you, it's even worse for a kid. Because while you have the security of knowing that, okay, sure, they're in the hospital, but it's a low risk operation. The kid doesn't know that. The kid has very limited information. They hear surgery and they think the worst. And you have to not bottle up your emotions, obviously, but have to keep in mind that you're not the only one suffering. And I loved every second of that. That was such a sweet, heartwarming moment. I hope you guys enjoyed it. The next chapter is chapter 6. It's gonna be, you know, it's really good. After that episode, I think, chapter 7 is going to be its own episode as well. It's not going to be put into 2. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that. That is coming forward. The fic that's going to be taking over this slot is going to be an orphaned account fic because R.I.P. Kingston's not with us anymore. I'm gonna forever have that joke. I have now gotten to the joke of Kingston being my religion. So instead of saying, oh my God, I say, oh my Kingston. Or Jesus Christ, I say Kingston Christ. Yeah. I'm not gonna mention it. Okay. But the one that's gonna be taking over is going to be a Hot Wings ship. It's gonna be a Hot Wings ship. It's gonna be quite lengthy, like double the size of this one, I believe. Yes, double the size of this one. So you're probably gonna have, like, at the very least 2, 3, maybe a month worth of this fic specifically. You can become a hero by Orphan Account on AO3. It's really cool. It's Hot Wings. I am really interested in reading that one. But yeah, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.